Those all ready? All right, you may bring them in. Thank you. You may be seated. Redirect, Ms. Lemkool.
Thank you, Your Honor. As Sergeant Aronstein, I just have a few areas I'd like to go over with you based upon the questions you were just asked by the defense. Now, Attorney D'Angelo asked you about the fact that you did have a lot of experience investigating various types of crimes. Isn't that true?
Yes, I have.
And that had included homicides?
That's correct.
With respect to your training and experience, did you also, since the beginning of this case, become more educated with respect to the investigation of the area of no-body homicides?
Yes, I specifically sought out and attended a number of trainings and consulted with a number of subject matter experts relating to specifically the best practices of investigating no-body homicide type of cases.
Besides attending those seminars, did you rely on resources like books and other things?
I relied on literature, yes.
So although some people have made a big deal about the fact that there'd be a prosecution of a no-body homicide, in your training and experience, did you learn that actually it's more common than people would think?
Absolutely, yes, I have.
And it has become widespread in the United States.
That's correct.
With respect to that, is there particular profiles and information relating to victims and defendants that is considered?
Yes.
With respect to defendants, is it important for law enforcement to evaluate inconsistencies and consistencies with respect to what they say?
Yes, specifically speaking, that provable lies are at times just as important as any admissions or confessions.
And with respect to this type of prosecution, is it not one of the most important components to attempt to establish that somebody is dead?
That's correct.
So from the beginning of this investigation, when police arrived that morning of April 26th of 2013, you indicated initially it's a missing persons case.
That's correct.
And although the defense is starting to ask you, how about this report in this year? Were you then identifying foul play? You testified that when you came into this, you're collecting all the evidence you can, correct?
That's correct.
You're documenting it,
That's correct.
and you're analyzing it.
That's correct.
Now, with respect to this investigation, is it the words of the defendant throughout these years that changed this investigation?
That is correct.
Part of that, from the first day with the initial searchers, where there's some information trickling in about the comments he was making that she was gone.
That's correct.
Later, fast forward 8 years, strike that 7 years, you now have two witnesses, witness 1 and 2, coming forward from the jail. Is that right?
That's correct, indicating the words that came directly from Mr. Prokopovitz.
Now, the searchers said the defendant was saying she's gone. Is that right?
That's correct.
Wes gave a statement to law enforcement. The first words out of Jim's mouth when he sees him is, "Your mom is gone." Isn't that right?
That's correct.
With respect to the statements that come from witness 1 and 2, they both are interviewed separately. Is that right?
That's correct.
Is that important in law enforcement, to be meeting with people separately to get their version of what's said?
That is correct.
Did both witness 1 and witness 2 say the defendant said he was 100% certain his wife was dead?
That's correct.
Did they also indicate, he indicated that he was certain we would never find the body?
That's correct.
Is that something that was very important in this case?
It was. It goes to his knowledge.
And establishing the fact that, sadly, we could conclude Victoria was dead.
That is correct.
Now, time, when you're doing these investigations, is time something that assists with respect to determining what's happened.
That's correct.
So from 2013 to 2021 here today, has Victoria Prokopovitz been seen from,
No,
heard from,
no,
and her remains have not been located?
they have not.
But you have the statements of the defendant.
I do.
Now, at the time, and the defense asked you about the memory of the defendant, and isn't it true he's an older gentleman? Perhaps he could be confused. Actually, Sergeant Aronstein, have you found at times the defendant's memory to be very detailed?
Yes, with personal communications with him, as well as documenting his communications with third parties. I've noted that they're quite distinct and unique and detailed, going back all the way to his childhood and describing the memories that he has.
And I think you made a reference when you were asked questions, something about when he wanted to say something. I didn't follow what that was, when the defendant wanted to detail something. What were you referring to?
I'm not certain, ma'am.
Okay. But at the time that you're being asked questions relative to the defendant's behavior, one of the things you were asked about is the plausibility or reasonable with respect to this Maplewood Shell drive. You recall that?
I do.
Now, what they didn't ask you is, isn't it true, up until when you do that ride along, the defendant is the one consistently in statements saying that he drove through that Maplewood Shell?
That's correct.
When he refers to driving, I think one of the interviews we heard, he says, I drove up and down the road, and he made some general statements. One of the constant things this defendant said is that he drove through that Maplewood Shell.
That's correct.
And he was clear and consistent. He drove through slowly, and he looked in the windows. Is that right?
That's correct.
He also said he didn't see any cars at the pump,
That's correct.
and he didn't see anybody at the pump.
That's correct.
Specific details, not just casually saying he drove down there, but what he observed when he was there. Is that important?
It is important.
Why is that important?
It goes to his state of mind and the details that he's indicating as far as to his recollection. It really goes to the specificity of this question. Is it possible it could be a different gas station? Is it possible he didn't drive to this particular location? When you're getting these specific details and information, and in this case having the individual drive themselves and explain what their state of mind was and the specific detail they're providing around that, it eliminates any and all possible doubt that the defendant is trying to indicate to you that this is exactly what it did and it can't be confused with anything else. I'd also like to note that based on the rural nature of this particular area, there's really not any other gas stations that are right there in that immediate area. We're not talking another one on the opposite corner of the street where you may find that in an urban area. This is a gas station that's well known, and as I had indicated prior, in relatively close geographical proximity to an area where Mr. Prokopovitch has lived for some time.
Now, with respect to what you've just testified to that gas station, and I'm showing you Exhibit 101, was this a diagram that was done to memorialize the drive that was, that you were told by the defendant he took on that date?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, previous to when you do the ride along, has he already described how he goes through that parking lot?
No, I think that was really kind of the idea of getting those details. There's a mention previously that I went to Maplewood Shell, but that really doesn't give you the detail, because then somebody could say that they were, on the highway nearby or something along those lines. But as far as the detail of where you are, how you are, did you look in the back parking lot? I found that note that he hadn't, and so that was really the purpose of that particular meeting, to try to get those details. When those details were obtained at that point, without having reviewed the physical evidence that was available to us, I was looking to either confirm or deny what he was saying, as I just didn't know at that time.
And with respect to that, the reference was made to him driving in front of the windows, is that right?
That's correct, between the windows and the pumps.
And it's your testimony that what was significant about the way he drove is you understood there could be availability of video surveillance.
I understood, based on the knowledge of this investigation, what evidence was available at our disposal at that time, and I knew that we had secured video at that gas station.
With respect to this video then, you testified earlier you then sent that out to Sergeant Lopnow for analysis?
That is correct.
At the time that you are now going to be determining whether this is plausible that he did this or not, would that be important or material to the investigation?
I found it to be highly material and important to this investigation, really specifically because of the time frame which this event allegedly occurred. This is the time frame that Mr. Pro-Koe-Povitch is indicating. It's in the middle of the night, and he's looking for his wife, and he's concerned about her whereabouts.
And if it's not found that he's being truthful about looking for his wife, that would be a problem for Mr. Prokopovitz's role in this.
Yes, that means that he's now lied to law enforcement for a number of years about his exact whereabouts when he's allegedly looking for his wife, and that he's elsewhere doing something else other than being at that gas station looking for his wife.
Now, besides being asked about the gas station, you were asked about some vehicles, is that right?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Now, the defense showed you exhibit number 32. Do you recall that?
I do.
And they indicated that that was a picture of the truck on May 2nd of 2013. Is that right?
Yes.
Whose truck is that?
That's Wesley Hedges' vehicle during that time frame.
Okay. And I'm showing you exhibit 34. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And what vehicle is that?
Mr. Prokopovitch's work vehicle.
Okay. Now, you got asked by the defense about the physical condition of exhibit number 32, which you testified to appeared to be clean. Is that right?
That's correct.
And now this is 34, the defendant's vehicle.
Yes.
Does this appear to be clean?
No.
What's the date on that?
Same date.
What's the date?
5/2/2013.
And what's the date on this?
5/2/2013.
So wouldn't these be vehicles that were being driven the same time of year?
That's correct.
You were asked some questions about the conditions and what the weather would be around then. This would have been the same date for two trucks in the same driveway,
That is correct.
but one is significantly different.
That is correct.
Now, you're also asked about this investigation. The tone and tenor of it, starting out as a missing person investigation, but that at some point it appeared to have changed. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, the defense was asking you and talked to you about the numerous searches that occurred in this investigation. Is that right?
Yes.
And with respect to that, they specifically asked you about, you know, those canine dogs that are there the first day and whether they had, where they had searched on that day. You recall that?
I do.
And that would have been Officer Newtall's and Officer Cornelius?
And one other officer, yes.
On that day, when those dogs are doing the canine searches, do you recall that both of those canines are for live persons?
I don't recall that.
Okay. If there is testimony in the record that because you're going out on a missing person case, it would have cause to believe you'd bring in the canines looking for a live person, right?
I think it would be appropriate to bring in both.
Okay. At that time, however, if that's what was brought in, because you're looking for a person, that's what would have been conducted in this case.
If that's the testimony, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, with respect to this investigation, and we just discussed the fact that based on your training and experience, you'd have to establish that Victoria was dead. At any time during this entire investigation, you did not locate Victoria.
That's correct.
You were asked some questions about whether or not you discovered any evidence in the house regarding foul play. Do you recall that?
I do.
At the time that you're in that house on April 26, 2013, isn't it true that you're looking at all the areas outside of the house?
I was briefly inside the house, but the focus after it was determined that Victoria was not inside the house, focused on the immediate area surrounding the residence.
Right,
That's correct.
because it's a missing person at that point, right?
That's correct.
So you don't find her in the house, so now you're looking outside the house.
That's correct.
When you're asked about what you would have located in the house, you testified previously you have training and experience with respect to investigating criminal instances of conduct.
That's correct.
On occasion, have those included domestic violence
They have.
offenses? With regard to responding to those types of incidents, have you responded in cases where there's been allegations of strangulation?
I have.
Witness number 2 in this case, when he gave a statement, when he testified, he indicated the defendant told him one way that his wife could have died was strangulation. Do you recall that?
I do.
When you have responded to instances of strangulation, is that a violent assault that may be something that wouldn't leave evidence of a physical disturbance?
That is correct.
It would just take 2 people to occur?
That is correct.
Have you also responded, you testified you're a former narcotics investigator, to circumstances and instances that involved alleged drug overdoses?
I have.
Person that's under the influence, that may be somebody who's lost their capacity to function
That is correct.
and to move.
Correct.
Are you familiar then, in this investigation, with the statement of Marcia Loritz that she walked in November of 2012 to see her mother completely incapacitated, believed to be drugged on a bed?
I am familiar with that statement.
Who did she say was there with her mother?
James Prokopovitz.
At the time that somebody is highly incapacitated, based upon your experience and training, would they be in a position to fight or leave evidence of a physical disturbance?
It would be much diminished, if at all, yes.
Now, and besides witness number 2 indicating one way the defendant indicated his wife could have died was strangulation, witness 2 said the defendant also stated that she could have been overdosed on drugs. Is that right?
Correct.
So those aren't just possibilities. There has been something the defendant's own word influenced this case to consider.
Correct.
So, again, then, Officer Aronstein, as this case transcends the defense asked you about 2013 into 2014 into 2015, you're still meeting with individuals and you're taking statements. Is that right?
That's correct.
If the investigation reflected that Darlene Ingalls, the defendant's ex-wife, was giving a statement to law enforcement in 2017 about the abuse she suffered at the hands of the defendant, you didn't have that back in the earlier document that the defense asked you about.
Not to that detail, no.
So when your report indicated you were still going to be conducting your investigation, you were continuing getting statements.
Correct.
You didn't have the statement of witness number 1, that the defendant said he was certain that his wife was dead.
I did not.
And you didn't have the statement of witness number 2, who also said the defendant said he was 100% certain she was dead.
I did not.
So, the statements that were received by law enforcement in 2019 by witness 1 and witness 2, they had not been associated as having a prior relationship with Vicky or Jim.
That's correct.
A lot of the statements that you received previous to that came from other laypersons out in the community,
That's correct.
McKee-Free employees,
Correct.
family members of Jim,
Correct.
family members of Vicky.
Correct.
And now you have two people who have come forward with information the defendant told them.
Correct.
Were the defendant's words in this investigation still very important?
They were.
What did the words that he used about Vicky being dead, was that important with respect to knowledge?
Correct. Not only is he verbalizing it, he's doing it consistently to a variety of individuals, and he's doing it with a level of certainty that could impute his direct knowledge as to that fact.
And the defense asked you about the fact that, hey, Jason Friday said that his mom said that the relationship between Jim and Kathy started in January of 2013, but you didn't have any records of that. I think he meant phone records. But isn't it true they had secret phones in this case?
That is correct.
Isn't it also true it was identified that they switched those phones regularly?
I had information that they switched them, yes.
Okay, so at the time that you're getting the analysis, you're relying on just what is located at that time as far as records?
That is correct.
Are you familiar with burner phones?
I am.
What are those?
Individuals would utilize different communication devices. So in this particular case, a cell phone that is purchased by cash or may not have a service plan and that is linked to a specific name, or an alias could be used to set up certain records. And so frequently individuals that are involved, as you had mentioned, I have experience in drug trafficking investigations. So people that are involved in either drug trafficking investigations or other activities that they don't want others to have knowledge about, specifically installation from law enforcement or others, they would utilize this form of communication.
And then lastly, you indicated that the defendant's words were important in this investigation. That's correct?
Very important.
At the time that the defendant initially does contact law enforcement, he does that hours after he initially determines that his wife is missing.
That is correct.
More than 8 hours?
Many hours, yes.
Based upon that, however, when law enforcement arrives there, it's the defendant indicating and providing information to them about what happened?
That's correct. We're relying on him as he's the individual that is identified to be with the individual that he's reporting to be missing, somebody that's close to him, his wife.
And placing her as, when he's waking up, being missing by 3:30 in the morning?
That's correct. The time of day, or in this case night, in the rural location is also highly noted.
And then he's calling the police after 1 o'clock?
That is correct, more specifically after having put in a full day of work.
With respect to that, he would have had at least 7 or 8 hours to put things back together if there ever was a disturbance?
He had an opportunity to change the scene prior to contacting the law enforcement. That's correct, if he chose to.
So at the time that the defendant is giving statements, the first statements to law enforcement, he does admit that he was the last one to see Vicky?
At what time was that?
When he is talking to officers that morning, Christine Bilgo.
It's my impression throughout the investigation that he was pretty clear that he is the one that's last to have known to see or hear her. Yes, that's correct.
And with respect to that, he indicated on that day that she had been fine.
He did.
He indicated that earlier that day, she had seemed good.
He did.
he admitted that he had been with her that day.
He did.
He put him in the house with her in the town of Pittsfield, Brown County, Wisconsin.
He did.
At some point in one of the interviews, he talked about a discussion of a tablecloth while he was driving her home from the doctor appointment. Do you recall that?
I do.
And with respect to that, that was the defendant talking about some kind of disagreement about stopping at a store for a tablecloth. Do you recall that?
I do. He provides conflicting information, but there are times that he indicates that there may have been some discourse over this thing that was requested by Victoria Prokopovitch.
And based upon your training and experience, have you found that there are little things that can become big things to people?
Yes, quite inexplicably at times. Some of the most violent crimes that we see unfortunately occur over minute details for one reason or another.
And with respect to that, do you have training and experience, and have you seen in these instances that something can trigger somebody pretty quickly?
Yes, and specifically as it relates to James Prokopovitch, I have personally witnessed Mr. Prokopovitch really, for the lack of better terms, lose his cool with no seeming explanation. A conversation could be going well, or a question that's posed is absolutely not confrontational in nature, and for one reason or another, I have watched Mr. Prokopovitch, it set him off, and he becomes not only verbally but physically aggressive as a response.
With respect to that, you also received information from Darlene Ingalls, who is his ex-wife.
That's correct.
With respect to the information that Darlene indicated, did she give information that he was very quick to anger?
She did.
Did she indicate what was a factor or what he was under the influence of when that would happen?
The common denominator was the consumption of alcohol.
And as part of this investigation and taking information from Wes, did he indicate whether or not the defendant was drinking beer the night at the dinner that he last saw Vicky at?
I can't recall that specifically.
Okay. But when you interviewed the defendant in one of your pre-planned interviews, you showed up and he was drinking a beer?
Yes, I don't know if I've experienced that to my recollection where I am meeting with somebody as a pre-planned interview and they're waiting for me drinking alcohol, especially since that's been something that's been discussed in this investigation up until that point, and something that's been alluded to as being an issue between Mr. Prokopovitch and his wife, something that was a point of contention for her and bothered her. I was surprised to see him at the picnic table waiting for me with a beer in his hand.
Well, and besides what you observed on that day, overall in this investigation, isn't it true that all of the witnesses were giving statements that he regularly and daily drank alcohol?
Absolutely correct.
And a reference was made numerous occasions that he was perceived to have an alcohol problem.
That's correct.
And with regard to that, as you just indicated, that was also something Victoria was concerned about.
Yes.
Now, on the evening, the last time Victoria is seen, the information in the statement of witness 2 about the fact that Jim told witness 2 that Victoria had confronted him about him being with another woman. Do you recall that?
That is correct.
The perception with respect to that happening, and I know the defense asked witness 2 about that. That was something that was perceived to have happened the night Victoria disappeared. Is that correct?
It came in as part of the discussion as to where's your wife? Is she missing? No, she's dead. I know she's dead. And as part of that conversation, there was discussion about some of the triggers and some of the issues, and this reference to infidelity comes in as part of this conversation, which could be inferred that it's part of the same event describing the disappearance of Victoria Prokopovitch.
Because it's all the information when witness 2 is asking the defendant if his wife is missing and if she's dead.
That's correct. It's relating to that event.
And lastly, with respect to that then, Sarah Youngs gave a statement that Victoria had told her that 3 or 4 months before she went missing, that she had concerns about Jim being in a relationship.
That's what she relayed.
Besides that information, when the defense has asked you if there's other evidence that corroborates that Jim and Kathy had a relationship in the beginning of 2013, isn't it true the defendant's words in one of the interviews also support that?
That is correct.
And is that the telephone call he talks about with respect to Marv being sick?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you recall when Marv passed away?
I believe it's November of 2012.
November of 2012. And the evidence and information was that Marv had been sick in the months before that. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So with respect to, they asked you if there were any phone records. Because of the multiple phones these individuals had, you weren't necessarily surprised you didn't have them. Is that correct?
I was not.
So although you couldn't confirm through phone records that relationship, it was more than just what Kathy told her son about it. There was other evidence.
It was corroborated through interviews, and that's the importance of having conducted thorough and numerous interviews.
And lastly, we've heard a lot about that relationship between Jim and Kathy. And in the ensuing statements they gave you after the evidentiary hearings, it was indicated they didn't tell the truth about the relationship because they knew how it would look. Is that right?
That's correct. They were concerned, specifically, Mr. Prokopovitch was concerned about the optics as it relates to his missing wife.
Not just about the reputation, but with regard to how it would look to the death investigation.
That is correct.
And at that point, they knew it was a death investigation.
Absolutely. It's been told to them on a number of occasions, and I had implored them to be truthful with me due to the serious nature of this investigation. You would think it would go without saying that your wife is missing and that the investigation is structured to be able to identify her whereabouts. But unfortunately, I had to remind both Kathy and Jim that this is indeed a serious investigation, that this is a death investigation. And I implored them over and over the years to be truthful with me. And unfortunately, on the interviews that you're indicating, they had both indicated to me that they had not been, despite all those admonishments.
And they agreed that even on the way to the courthouse, they discussed lying about this.
There was discussion about that they acknowledged, yes.
And they had agreed to do that.
That is correct.
Your Honor, the city has no further questions. We are going to move for the admission of the remaining exhibits. And I think that would be specifically, I think these photos were. I guess I'd have to defer to the clerk, but to complete this witness, we can do that after the witness is off the stand.
So did you say you moved to admit all remaining witnesses? I'm sorry,
Remaining exhibits. I'll do that at the conclusion of the witness.
All right. Further cross?
Thank you. So, Detective Aronstein, you were talking about Exhibit 32, 33, and 34, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were specifically saying, well, Wesley's truck is clean, correct?
Especially by comparison.
Okay. Wesley doesn't work.
He is not.
He doesn't travel around other than go see friends, correct?
That's my understanding.
You don't know if he got his truck washed prior to getting this picture taken, do you?
I do not.
In comparison to Jim's truck, he works at Georgia Pacific.
He works for an excavating company. Georgia Pacific is the contract, that's correct.
And he also goes to McKeefrey's, which also has a bunch of dirt and stuff around it, correct?
That is correct.
So you don't know if the truck looked like this on April 26th, correct?
I do not.
When it comes to, you were asked about that when you first went to the house to speak with Jim Prokopovitz on April 26th, the state classified it as a missing persons investigation, yet you testified that it was a dual investigation, missing person and possible other issues, correct?
Well, the other issue is you want to be cognizant that a missing person investigation may also be a death investigation.
And I think you testified that you treat all of these like death investigations so you don't miss any facts.
That is correct.
So on the 26th, it wasn't just a missing person investigation, it was a dual investigation for a potential death investigation.
It's a missing person investigation that's being treated thoroughly.
And as far as the statements that were made by witness 1 and witness 2, they were made 6 years after she went missing, correct?
Approximately.
And you typed up these statements, correct?
Not all of them.
Witness 2 specifically you typed up, correct?
Witness 2 specifically, no. No, witness 2 had written a statement, and then there were 2 more that were typed up.
Officer Manhattan is marked as Exhibit 95. Do you recognize that document?
Just 1 second to review it, as there's some redaction. Yes, sir, I do.
And that is a document that you typed up for witness number 2?
So I had interviewed witness number 2, and based on the information provided to me by witness number 2, I had generated this document in his presence. I subsequently reviewed this document paragraph by paragraph out loud with witness number 2. Every page changes were made as necessary. Every bottom of every page was it was notated by witness number 2 that it was truthful and accurate, and subsequently page number 3 was signed by witness number 2 indicating that it was truthful and accurate. Furthermore, this particular interaction was recorded to document the interaction.
And in that statement on the second page, there's a statement that the state referenced about this argument they got. And witness number 2, in the statement that you just testified to, that you went over with him paragraph by paragraph and had him sign, indicates the argument he had about any sort of infidelity was years ago. True?
Can you refer me to the paragraph?
Sure.
I'm on page 2, sir.
You see that? So starting with JP asked.
Okay, well, if I can just review it briefly.
Yep, please.
Yes, there's a reference to an argument in that there was suspicion that the defendant was speaking with someone else.
And it specifically says that it happened years ago.
Yes, it does.
And you heard witness number 2 said that maybe some of his statements were misconstrued by you, but that's not the case, correct?
Do I recall the witness testifying that the statements may have been misconstrued by me?
Correct.
I believe that was a question that may have been posed to the witness.
But he indicated that maybe certain statements that you typed up were misconstrued, and I specifically asked him that, correct?
I recall you asking that question. I don't recall if he ever gave you that answer.
Okay. Now, you were asked specifically about timeframes, and I think it was brought up with regards to Darlene Ingalls about Mr. Prokopovitz being potentially abusive to her in their first marriage, correct?
That's correct.
Through your interviews, none of the children of Victoria Prokopovitz ever indicated that they were concerned about their mother's safety with Jim, true?
No, there were concerns about Victoria's safety. I don't think there was a reference to physical abuse.
Did they ever bring up these concerns about her safety prior to her going missing?
I did not know the family at all prior to her disappearance.
Let me ask the question a different way. Did they ever bring up the concerns about Victoria being abused by Jim prior to her going missing?
So there are concerns that were identified. They were either financial or mental abuse, or the description that Marshal Lords provides as far as to finding her mother incapacitated, and the lack of caring and attention provided by James Prokopovitch. So there were, throughout the years, a number of reflections and concerns that were identified as to the treatment of Victoria Prokopovitch by her husband.
Let's talk about the time that Marshal Lawrence found her mother incapacitated. She finds her incapacitated, correct? This is November of 2012.
That's what she reports.
And she also reported that she left, correct?
That's what she reports.
She's so concerned about her mother being incapacitated that she left the residence without knowing whether mother was fine or not.
She reports that she trusted her father.
So she didn't have concerns about her father prior to her mother going missing, correct?
She reported having concerns, but she also reported that she loved and trusted her father.
And that was the last time that she went and saw her mother prior to her going missing, true?
That's correct.
And she didn't have a lot of conversations with her mother in the interim either, did she?
She expanded on the reason for the communication, but that is correct. It started to become more infrequent towards the end of Victoria's life.
So the family has concerns about Jim's behavior towards Victoria, yet nobody other than Wes was in the house for 6 months prior to her going missing.
Object to the form of the question. We have no time reference.
Overruled. You can answer.
I apologize to have you ask the question again, please.
Sure. Nobody had concerns about Victoria's safety 6 months prior to her going missing, correct?
So what was relayed to me is that they had concerns that she was becoming more withdrawn, and the communication was becoming more infrequent, but there was trust and love for their father who had raised them, that he would be caring for Victoria.
And so the only indication of physical harm that Jim may have caused was to Darlene Ingalls, well over now be 40 years, correct?
Object to the form. That's not a...
Overruled.
The information was that he was physically abusive with his first wife, Darlene, back when they were married. That's correct.
But there's no records or evidence of that, correct?
There is, the defendant himself acknowledged him being physically abusive with his first wife.
But he never acknowledged being physically abusive with Victoria Prokopovitz, did he?
That's my understanding.
You mentioned that about Jim's regular alcohol consumption. So the night that she went missing, is your understanding that he was drinking that night?
I think I testified I didn't recall what the information was that night.
Wesley was in the house prior to leaving, correct?
He was in the house prior to leaving for the night, correct?
And he witnessed Jim at the dinner table, correct?
He did.
And there was no indication from Wesley in any of his interviews he was concerned about his mother's safety when he left that night, true?
There was no indication.
And Wesley never indicated what time he was coming back, correct?
He did not.
You testified that there was this expansive amount of time that Jim could have done something to Victoria and then straightened up the house, correct?
I indicated that there was a period of time that was available to the defendant.
This period of time would have been uncertain if he didn't know when Wes was coming home, true?
It would have been uncertain to the defendant, correct?
And when it was brought up about Jim's statement that mom is gone, Wes never indicated that Jim looked filthy, did he?
He did not.
He didn't indicate that something looked out of place on Jim, correct?
He indicated Jim looked frazzled or a word similar to that at that time.
And Wesley also didn't call anybody right away after Jim said, mom's gone, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, Wesley just went in the house and he said he went to bed, true?
That's my understanding.
You were talked about there's a possibility of strangulation, but you don't have any concrete evidence to the fact that a strangulation occurred in this case, true?
Correct.
You were also talked about overdose on medication, but you don't have any concrete evidence that there was an overdose on medication.
I do not.
So all these are theories, but nothing concrete.
I don't have any information as to the mechanism.
And it was stated by the state that Mr. Prokopovitz himself said to one of the witnesses, well, she could have been strangled, she could have overdosed, correct?
There was a conversation about the manner of her death, that's correct.
But he also said there's a million ways to die.
And he also said he may have been involved in her death.
He may have been involved, but nobody actually knows for certain, true?
Mr. Pro-Koe-Povitch does.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Do you have anything further?
Any 1 minute, Your Honor.
Thank you. Excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Do you have the next witness ready? Jurors, you can stand up and stretch.
We're going to move for some exhibits that we're going to be using with the next witness.
All right.
Your Honor, just to be clear, Exhibit 107 did not be submitted. You were drawing that was just used to refresh the
Yeah.
officer's recollection. Your Honor, just Exhibit 107 that was used to refresh the officer's memory, I would not move it into evidence. I withdraw it, please.
All right.
Your Honor, this time the state would move for the admission of the maps 100 and 101.
You may be seated.
No objection, Your Honor.
So the maps are 100 and 101
Yes.
admitted. swear the testimony you're about to give in the matter now before the court shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. Pull your chair real close to the microphone. Would you first state and then spell your name?
Richard Lochnow, RICHARD-LOPPNOW.
You have to move forward. Always have the microphone below your visor. Thank you. Could you just do your name again if it was hard to hear?
Richard Lochnow.
Thank you.
Can you state for the record how you're currently employed?
I'm employed by the Brown County Sheriff's Office.
And what is your current assignment with the Brown County Sheriff's Office?
I'm assigned to the investigative division.
And what is your rank?
Sergeant.
How long have you worked in law enforcement?
Since 2003.
And is the entirety of that time with the Brown County Sheriff's Office?
Yes, it is.
Did you start as a patrol deputy?
Yes.
What other sort of assignments have you had with the Sheriff's Office?
I've also been assigned to the Brown County Drug Task Force for several years. I was assigned to the village of Alloway as a directed enforcement officer, which is essentially community police. And from there, I went to the investigative division.
So how long have you specifically been assigned to the investigative division?
Since January of 2016.
As an investigative sergeant, I guess what are some of your primary responsibilities?
I'm assigned to our general investigative division, which means I get assigned cases of all types. So typically a patrol officer will take a initial complaint, and then if it gets forwarded on to our division, it'll get assigned to us to follow up on.
In addition to cases that you yourself are specifically assigned, do you also typically assist other investigators in your office with their own investigations?
Yes, we do. Help each other out at times.
And directing your attention to 2017, June 23rd, do you recall being requested by Sergeant Aronstein to assist in reviewing some evidence with respect to the disappearance of Victoria-Prokopovitz?
Yes, I do.
And I guess what were you requested to do?
I was asked to review surveillance video from the Middletown Road Shell Station, which is the Maplewood Shell, off of Highway 29 near Maplewood meets.
Okay. And what sort of information were you receiving from Sergeant Aronstein with respect to why you were reviewing this information?
I received information that Mr. Prokopovitz had driven through the Shell Station parking lot between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. on April 26, 2013, and I was asked to review the surveillance video to look for his vehicle or him.
Okay. Did you ultimately review that video?
Yes, I did.
Was that previously collected by other officers with your department and placed into evidence?
It was. I believe it was collected in 2013 and placed into evidence.
Okay. Sergeant, it's showing you it's been marked as Exhibit 108. Do you recognize that exhibit?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
This is the original thumb drive that contains the video that was collected from the Maplewood Shell.
And when we're talking about the Shell surveillance video that you reviewed, was that the video that was contained, I guess, on that flash drive in the exhibit?
Yes.
Okay. And the date that you reviewed was April 26th of 2013?
Yes.
Okay. I'd move 108, Your Honor.
No objection, Your Honor.
108 is admitted.
And then Sergeant, if you could look behind you, 101, Exhibit 101 is still being displayed. Do you recognize what that depicts?
Yes, I do.
And what does that depict?
It's an overhead view of the Maplewood Shell.
Okay. And there appear to be some diagrams drawn on that map. Are you familiar with what those represent?
I am.
What is that?
It would be the path that was supposedly traveled by Mr. Prokopovitz when he claimed to have driven through the parking lot.
Okay. And the surveillance video you reviewed from the Shell gas station, first, I guess, can you point out the physical building itself on Exhibit 101 for us?
Sure.
This would be the actual gas station building, and then right here is the pumps.
So for the record, you pointed towards the structure sort of just above the blue line, sort of in the middle of that exhibit. Does that appear accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And the pumps are sort of below that blue line, again, in the middle of that photograph?
Yes.
Okay. So the surveillance video that you're reviewing from the Shell gas station on April 26, 2013, were there several angles that you reviewed?
There were several angles that I found that did show the outside, or the south side of the building, towards the gas pumps that I reviewed.
Okay. And do you recall the approximate locations those would have been located?
If I recall correctly, there was cameras that were labeled number 1 and 2 that were on the exterior of the building on the south side. Those cameras were towards the east and west corners of the building. Those showed panning views of the gas pumps.
And cameras 1 and 2, could you point out where those would have been located on the store for us, referencing Exhibit 101?
Approximately here and here.
And those would face out towards the pump?
Yes, those were facing out towards the pumps.
Were those stationary cameras or were they sort of panning?
They were both panning cameras. So one of the cameras was covering pumps 1 through 4, and the other camera was covering pumps 4 through 8.
So between those two cameras, did you observe that had a good coverage of basically the front parking lot of that store?
Yeah, the cameras were set up, it looked like, to capture license plates on the gas pumps, but you could also see between the building and the gas pumps in that angle.
And was there also an interior camera that
There
you
was.
reviewed as well?
There was a camera, I believe it was camera number 3 in the video, that was an interior view that faced the front doors. So it was south-facing, the 2 glass doors that had a view out into the parking lot. I saw on those angles that you could see the parking lot, which included some parking spaces, and then the driving lane, and then you could see the base of the gas pumps.
Okay. And prior to you being asked to review the video, did Sergeant Aronstein inform you on generally what you were to be looking for?
Yes.
And I guess what was that?
It was specifically a blue GMC pickup truck. It was a regular cab, and it had a white toolbox and gas tank on the back.
I'm showing it's been previously marked as Exhibit 33. Do you recognize that exhibit?
Yes,
And what do you believe that to be?
that is the truck I was looking for in the video.
Okay. And you were informed of the areas that Mr. Prokopovitz stated he had driven through the gas station on that date?
Yes,
And the camera angles that you reviewed, do you believe that would have essentially captured if an individual were to have actually traveled that path?
yes, I do.
And you mentioned you reviewed on June 23rd of 2017 the hours between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m.?
Initially, that was the time frame I was provided, so those are the hours I reviewed.
And why did you focus on that time frame?
I was provided the information from Sergeant Aronstein that, based on Mr. Prokopovitz's statement, that's the time frame he would have driven through the parking lot there.
We're talking about 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., so the early morning hours. Was it dark out in the videos?
Yes,
Is there still adequate lighting in that area?
there is. The parking lot and the gas pumps are pretty well lit.
And did you review each of those camera angles individually?
Yep, I did individual reviews of them
Okay.
from that time frame.
Okay, for those 3 hours.
Yeah.
And I guess based upon your review of those vantage points, did you observe the vehicle reference in Exhibit 33 in any of the time frames that you reviewed?
I did not.
Did you also look for whether there would be any individuals walking around the gas station?
I did. While watching for the vehicle, I was also watching for people, whether it was Mr. Prokopovitch or Mrs. Prokopovitch.
Okay. I guess, did you see either of those individuals in the cameras as well?
No, I didn't.
After June 23rd of 2017, did you have cause to review that video a second time?
I did. Later on, Sergeant Aronstein asked me to review further video earlier in those morning hours. So I ended up watching more video from midnight till 3 a.m., those same camera angles.
And that, if you recall, would that have been May 6th of 2019?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. You reviewed those same 3 cameras that we referenced earlier?
Yes.
In what time frame did you watch, I guess, this time around?
That time I focused more on that midnight till 3 a.m. on April 26, 2013. And then I also watched the other 3 hours again as well.
So you watched 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. and then rewatched 3 a.m. to about 6 a.m.?
Yes.
And again, did you watch each of those vantage points individually?
I believe when I reviewed it the second time, when I was asked to review the video from 12 a.m. to 3 a.m., I focused on camera number 3 because that gave a good view outside the doors in that parking lot. So any vehicles passing by, I would be able to identify a vehicle going by. And then if I needed to check on one of the vehicles I saw, and then I also used the other cameras to confirm or deny it was the vehicle I was looking for.
Okay, so you used camera 3 to identify if there were any vehicles in the area, and then use the exterior ones to confirm whether or not it was the vehicle you were trying to look for?
Yes.
Okay. And in your review of all 3 of those camera angles, did you observe the vehicle depicted in Exhibit 33?
No, I didn't.
And same question with respect to whether or not you observed Mr. or Mrs. Prokopovitz.
I did not.
Are those 2 occasions the only 2 times you've reviewed this video?
No, actually, several weeks ago, I took another look at it again with the same results. I was not able to locate the vehicle or persons associated with this case.
In the same time frames?
Yes.
And you mentioned the same results?
Yes.
So I guess to put a fine point on it, you didn't observe the suspect vehicle the 3rd time you watched it either?
No.
In totality, how many hours have you spent watching the Shell gas station video between 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. on April 26, 2013?
I would say it's difficult to say an exact time. Looking at shifts of work, I would say at least 2 shifts, possibly more, so probably 16 hours.
Or more?
Or more.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Ross?
Detective, the surveillance video, were the videos a constant on, or did they take snapshots as movement happened?
It appeared to be constant on.
Constant on, okay. The camera angles that you were looking at, you mentioned that they took photographs of the pumps area. Did it go past the pumps area? So did the video show anything so if you were asked about the blue line in the drive-through, and there's some, maybe it's the east approach. It'll be easier this way. So your camera angles that you mentioned were here. These are the actual gas pumps, correct?
Yes.
Did the video cameras indicate anything outside of the gas pumps, just towards the road?
The 2 exterior cameras would have shown a little bit past the pumps towards the road. The interior camera, which was labeled number 3, only went to the base of the gas pumps.
Which is the base of the gas pumps. So the interior camera only got to the gas pumps.
Correct.
The exterior ones showed a little bit past. So if somebody's on the road, you wouldn't necessarily see the vehicle?
I don't recall if it captured the road itself. I do remember it went past the pumps and it did capture the driveways.
Okay. So anything in here, it may or may not have captured it?
I don't recall exactly how far it went out from the pumps.
Okay.
Redirect?
Briefly, so Sergeant, the area you were looking at was predominantly between the store and the gas pumps?
Yes.
And the information you had received is that the claim was that a vehicle drove through that area.
Yeah, the information I received was very specific to, that was the road of travel as shown in that diagram, so that was the area I was focused on.
Okay. And the area then between the gas station itself and the gas pumps, did you see in this time frame any vehicle slow down in front of the store?
There was other vehicles during those hours of night. There wasn't much traffic, but there were some vehicles coming and going. I was able to view other vehicles going by, but not the truck I was looking for.
You did observe other vehicles, but then you confirmed it wasn't this vehicle?
Correct.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr. Cross?
No, sir.
Thank you, you're excused.
Thank you.
Further witnesses by the state?
Yes, Judge. The state will call Special Agent Jay Yergis.
How much time you got in the country? How far can you go? How long can you go? Half hour? What's that?
Given the matter now before the court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. You may be seated. Okay, spell your name.
My name is Jay, middle initial K, as in King, Yergis, Jayerges.
Examine your witness.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Can you say for the record how you're currently employed?
I'm a special agent with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigation.
And can you outline for us your experience in law enforcement?
Yeah, I entered Wisconsin law enforcement in 1992. I worked for two small municipalities as patrol officer. In 1995, I transitioned to a chief of police role with the Cambria Police Department. In 1999, I transitioned to the Columbia County Sheriff's Office, where I served as a detective sergeant for nearly 13 years. In 2011, I transitioned to my current role with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, DCI.
And we heard some testimony about DCI. Can you outline for us, what is DCI?
Sure. So in Wisconsin, there is a Department of Justice. That is a entity that is overseen by the Attorney General. So citizens in Wisconsin every 4 years have the opportunity, those citizens that vote can vote and choose an elected official as the Attorney General. The Attorney General for the state of Wisconsin is the proverbial chief law enforcement official in the state of Wisconsin. His Department of Justice, his or her Department of Justice, is then comprised of an assortment of divisions, bureaus, and offices. Inside DOJ, and some people may read things about DOJ or DCI. In DOJ, there's things like the Division of Legal Services. Those are attorneys that practice law in civil litigation, in criminal litigation, in appeals. There's the Division of Laboratory Services, so the state crime lab. We have 3 crime laboratories in the state of Wisconsin. So they deliver the scientific services, laboratory services for all of law enforcement in Wisconsin and have field response capabilities. There's the Office of Crime Victim Services, who works with victims of crimes throughout the state. There's Law Enforcement Services Bureau that oversees the the certification of law enforcement professionals such as myself or such as Sergeant Aronstein, and jail officers who work in jail facilities across the state. And then in addition to the various bureaus, divisions, offices, there's a small entity that's referred to as the Division of Criminal Investigation. That's a law enforcement office in DOJ that employs special agents such as myself. We have 5 offices across the state, so we work in regional capacities. And in each of those 5 offices, there's an assortment of specialized special agents who serve in specially trained roles. Special agents travel the state and work, become specialists or experts in their field, so to speak, and deal with investigations of state importance and large-scale critical incidents, incidents that require multi-jurisdictional responses or coordination or assistance. Our authority is in all 72 counties, and it's very, very normal for local law enforcement, police departments, sheriff's offices across the state to work cooperatively with us or request our services or our specialized training. There's all sorts of different specialized training in DCI. There's narcotics agents, there's internet crimes against children agents, there are gaming agents, there are major crime bureau agents such as myself. So I serve in the Major Crimes Bureau. I've served in the Special Investigations Bureau and other bureaus during my tenure, but by and part, I'm a specialized death investigator, and we deal with felony level incidents that are multi-jurisdictional, complex, or need special additional resources or investigation.
Okay.
Let me interrupt you here. It is within minutes of 12 o'clock, I guess within a minute. So we'll take our 1-hour lunch break at this time. All rise for the jurors. You can be seated. And I didn't interrupt Mr. Saunders, but I didn't know that we needed that lengthy of a civics lessons to the jurors on that question. And so I just wanted to indicate, I hope that the answer for the remainder of the examination stays relatively close to the question. I just felt that we gave jurors a 10-minute explanation, and I think he could have explained what his job was well less than 10 minutes. I just hope this is not an indication of what may occur for the rest of the examination. I just hope this was just an isolated incident, but I didn't want to object in front of the jurors or make a note on the record, but I thought that answer was excessively unnecessary, well beyond what his individual capacity is. And I'm just kind of indicating I hope we can do a little bit better this afternoon. All right, court to recess for 1 hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.